What's up everyone? Today I've got an in-depth guide on AJAX request interception, scraping API calls directly. Whether you're a complete beginner or you've been doing this for a while, I guarantee you'll pick up some valuable insights. Let's get right into it. AJAX request interception is one of the most powerful techniques in modern web scraping. Instead of parsing HTML to extract data, you intercept the underlying API calls that websites make to load their data. This often gives you clean, structured JSON data directly, bypassing the need to parse complex HTML structures. Let's start with why AJAX interception matters. Modern websites are increasingly single-page applications that load data dynamically through API calls. The HTML you see in view source is often just a shell. The actual data like product listings, prices, reviews, and search results loads via AJAX requests after the page renders. If you only scrape the initial HTML, you miss most of the data. The basic approach works like this. Open the website in a browser and open the Developer Tools Network tab. Filter for XHR or fetch requests. Interact with the page by scrolling, clicking, or searching. Watch for API requests that return the data you want. These requests often return JSON that's much cleaner and more structured than the HTML. Once you've identified the API endpoints, you have two options. The first is direct API calls, where you skip the browser entirely and make HTTP requests directly to the API endpoint. This is faster, uses less resources, and gives you clean, structured data. You just need to replicate the correct headers, cookies, and parameters. The second option is browser-based interception, where you use a headless browser and intercept network requests programmatically. Tools like Playwright and Puppeteer let you listen for specific network requests and capture their responses. For direct API scraping, the key steps are to identify the API endpoint URL from the Network tab, note the request method, which is usually GET or POST, copy the required headers, especially authorization tokens and cookies, understand the query parameters for pagination and filtering, and then replicate the request in your scraping code. The advantages of direct API scraping are significant. You get structured data, usually in JSON format, which eliminates HTML parsing entirely. It's much faster since you're making one request instead of loading an entire page. It uses less bandwidth and resources, and the data is often more complete than what's displayed in the HTML. For browser-based interception, Playwright and Puppeteer both support listening to network events. You can set up a listener that captures responses matching certain URL patterns, then extract the JSON data from those responses while the page loads normally. This approach works when the API requires browser cookies or authentication that's hard to replicate, when chorus restrictions prevent direct API calls, or when you need to trigger specific user interactions to generate the API calls. Some common patterns you'll encounter. Infinite scroll pages typically make API calls as you scroll, each returning a batch of items with a cursor or offset parameter for the next batch. Search results pages make API calls with search terms and page numbers, returning results in JSON. Autocomplete and suggestions make lightweight API calls as you type, returning candidate results. And price or availability checks make API calls to check real-time data, often with anti-bot protections. Some important considerations. API endpoints can change without notice. Always build in error handling and monitoring. Some APIs require specific headers, like referrer or origin headers, to work. Rate limiting is often stricter on API endpoints than on regular page loads. And some sites actively obfuscate their API calls with encrypted parameters or rotating tokens. Now for some frequently asked questions. Is it easier to scrape APIs than HTML? Generally, yes. API responses are structured data, usually JSON, which is much easier to parse than HTML. However, APIs may have stricter rate limiting and authentication requirements. How do I find hidden API endpoints? Use your browser's Network tab in Developer Tools. Filter by XHR or fetch requests. Interact with the page and watch for requests that return the data you need. You can also check the page's JavaScript source for API URL patterns. Can websites detect API scraping? Yes. Websites can monitor for unusual request patterns, missing browser fingerprints, and high request rates. Use realistic headers, add delays between requests, and use residential proxies for best results. What if the API requires authentication? Capture the authentication flow using browser developer tools. Replicate the login process, capture the auth token or session cookie, and include it in your API requests. So there you have it, a complete breakdown of AJAX request interception for web scraping. Remember, the key is to start implementing what you've learned and keep refining your approach over time. For more guides like this one, visit us at dataresearchtools.com. We're constantly putting out new content to help you stay ahead of the curve. See you in the next one.